We could divert into a discussion of particle physics if you like. I've heard wonderful things about the people of South Australia, so I assume you know much more than I do about particle physics. So, thank you very much for coming this morning. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be here. It's a beautiful day. I'm loving the sunlight so I can get over what residual jet lag I might have. And it's also a privilege to be here with Rachel and with Mark as well, two brilliant people. It's really great to share the stage with them. So the work that we do at Changeist is kind of in that really unusual space that sits between the fast-changing technologies and business models and a lot of the things that Rachel's described and that Mark may describe as well, and us as people, we as human beings in society, and how we actually manage the two of those. I have a long history looking at the future of money. The funny thing about being a futurist is that you can work on things for a long time. Starting in about 1991, 92, I managed to get drawn into this area through the field of French electronic payments. No, not French electronica. Damn it, Google. French electronic payments, sorry. Really quick Daft Punk joke, had to slip it in. And looking at Minitel, a really early system pre-internet. The French had the internet before the rest of us, bless them. And looking at how we would basically use new digital platforms and new electronic platforms to carry out commerce, to have money. What does digital money look like? And for my sins, I wrote probably the first forecast of digital cash and micropayments in the mid-1990s. I'm happy to say from the stage that I got it wrong. Well, I got the wrong mechanism. Actually, iTunes was the right idea. And it turned out that by the time we thought we might be having millions and millions of electronic transactions of a very small price, we were playing with the idea of digital coins. And it turns out it was basically credit cards to buy money, music for 99 cents. As you can see, this has been subtitled, a lovely French cash point, but fortunately someone came along and wrote money on it. And part of what I want to talk about today is this kind of tension between the technological and the social that we face, and how we're actually going to solve the issue if we can ever actually solve it. The history of money, of course, goes back 4,000 or 5,000 years. If you've had the opportunity to read anthropologist David Graeber's book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, he makes a really interesting point, and that is that money didn't, as most people presume, as economists will tell you, come about as a means of substituting for barter, but it actually came about as a substitute or as a means of expressing debt and obligation to each other. Hold that point in your mind. So at the same time as I've been looking at these amazing new technologies that are emerging, things like the blockchain that I'll mention again in a moment, I'm sure it's de rigueur for this kind of talk. We also have spent a lot of time looking at the kind of ever-evolving and yet eternal means of having money. A few years ago, even as I was looking at these new digital cash systems and new payment systems, I was sent on a project to help look at the unbanked in India. And there were, in the mid-2000s, 500 million people, maybe even upwards of 750 million people in the country who weren't banked by traditional definitions. That means, of course, as we take banking in our own kind of lives, having a bank account, having cash cards, having one of these lovely cash points that you just saw a moment ago nearby that you can access, and taking on all of the kind of trappings of what money means to us. And probably for most of us, money means not only just something fungible that you can trade and spend to buy a flat white, but it probably means all of the different accounts that you have to keep in track of in your mind that you probably owe somebody something for. And even as we're trying to kind of revolutionize money and make money new again, money has always kind of been with us. And as you look at things like traditional marketplaces, this is actually a beautiful photograph that sort of struck me when I was doing some research for this by a woman named Meena Kadri of some waits in the marketplace in one Indian city. We've always also found ways to kind of adapt money to what we need to do as people. There wasn't a kind of global unicorn billion-dollar company that decided to make these amazing weights and drop them off in every town and village and give them this amazing new way to measure out and standardize the way they do transactions for a small fee. these practices emerged over hundreds and thousands of years of culture, of our own kind of need to interact locally with each other and really just extend the kind of standardization and the reference that we would need to make that money system viable over the area that was necessary. In this case, we're also still adapting these systems to our own personal kind of beliefs and values. Something you might notice in this photograph is this kind of color down here. This is actually holy powder that's put on the weights in the morning before trading to effectively kind of anoint and pay some respect to the trades that are happening during that day and make sure that everyone who is trading in that marketplace is doing so under a watchful eye. And this is something, again, that's quite standardized, these weights. But we bring our own kind of cultural approaches and aspects to them as well. Sometimes we do amazing things with money. Sometimes we build brilliant new systems. A lot of what Rachel was describing before has pumped a tremendous amount of new value into marketplaces. It's unlocked idle assets. It's created efficiencies. But we also, at the same time, as the recession was giving us the sharing economy, it was triggered by our own kind of ability and maybe sometimes lack of control of ourselves to stop innovating around money. If you have seen movies like The Big Short or Margin Call, you may know what collateralized debt obligations are. Those and many other kinds of synthetic forms of value that were created in the late 1990s and the 2000s by really genius people, many of whom actually have rocket science degrees sitting in the large banks, gave us, for a time, some additional kind of velocity and value in the marketplace, but at the same time, it also brought us to these types of images as well, and gave us the kinds of calamities where massive systemic dislocations in those financial systems can go awry. So it can do wonderful things, but it can also, when you try to make them kind of global systems that move better and faster than the way people think, it can be kind of complicated. Does anyone know what this is? These are thousands of bots, of trades going on in the background that are basically automated. This is one of many dozens or hundreds of images of high-frequency trading that you can find when you pump that into Google and pull up some images. This is what the modern financial markets look like today. And on some days, you might have up to 70–75% of trades going on in the U.S. Stock market involve no human at all. They're simply bot versus bot transactions, and a lot of the kind of movement that you see here on the screen are actually kind of fakes. They're spoofs. They're moves by one bot to draw another bot into the market, get it to kind of trade something and then back away from the trade again. So a lot of this kind of transactional volume is actually being generated by no one at all. It's being generated by technology trading on its own. And sometimes this makes tremendous amounts of value for us. And sometimes, as you saw with the collapse of sterling last week, hopefully no one had any major assets in sterling. Unfortunately, my next 3 invoices are in sterling. One headline that comes from the FT early in the morning about the French president basically pushing back against Brexit is picked up by a script that's listening for that kind of headline. Immediately, there are trades that go on before anyone's awake to see what's going on. Traders get panicked phone calls, get in the office now. Sterling's collapsing, it loses 10–15% of its value, and then where are we? So again, technology can do some wonderful things. Technology can also, with the wrong assumptions, do some not so wonderful things. But strangely, even before the last decade, we have always been financializing things. We've always been trying to find new ways to create instruments of value that give us a means of conducting new kinds of exchange. That's the kind of people we are. That's the kind of creatures we are. We're always seeking to generate new kinds of value. It's a good instinct that we have as creatures. So let's set that aside for a moment, and I want to kind of look at some of the other things that emerged during the global recession that also kind of gave us the sharing economy. We actually saw the reemergence of some ideas that weren't so new For example, this is a time bank that's in The Hague in the Netherlands, about an hour or so away from where I live. Lovely jet air. And the idea here at this time bank in Den Haag, or at the hundreds of time banks that sprang up through places like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Detroit, New York, Oakland, a lot of places that were quite hard hit during the recession, fell back on some older ideas to create other means of exchange for us. So in some cases, the future of money for these communities were using things like time. I may not have money, but I can use my time to work in a cafe, to work in childcare, to help someone, to provide some kind of direct service myself, and use that as an exchange of value to get something back. And a number of these communities have kept these kinds of time banks running, because without access to capital, without access to money coming to them from the central banks, from international monetary bodies, this is what they have to rely on. This is the future of money for them, is to generate some sort of asset or tradable idea of their own. This is an idea that's been kicking around for quite a long time. Actually, when you think about it, before the kind of standardization around national and global currencies, local currencies were what we had. This is Berkshires that are being used in the US. We have things like the Brixton pound, that there are 250 odd businesses around Brixton that use them in South London. Beautiful piece of currency, has an amazing picture of David Bowie on it, so if you can ever find one of those bills, it's collectible. And again, other communities begin to find ways to create these currencies to dislocate or to kind of disengage from larger vertical economies that they actually can't control and have no say-so in. Ada Colau, who's the recently elected mayor of Barcelona, who previously was a housing activist who was working on behalf of people who had had their homes foreclosed on in Barcelona, has come in as mayor. She's done some radical and different things, and one of the things she's often or tried to do is bring in a currency that's separate for the city of Barcelona itself, in a way to protect the local economy there and to allow it to continue to function in the way that the locals want it to. They've felt the kind of sharp end of the stick from the Spanish Central Bank, from the European Central Bank, from global financial bodies that have tried to decide what's appropriate and what level of pain local people in the market in Barcelona should have to endure. And they said, you know what? We don't need that. Maybe we can actually run our own internal economy and find a way to balance somewhere between the euro and a Barcelona currency. It's quite hard to do. None of these local currencies ever really attain a kind of regional or national scale. But they're not necessarily designed to or engineered to. They're often meant to be sufficient and appropriate in size and scale and function to suit the local cultural values in that area and allow people to kind of retain value at the grassroots. M-Pesa is a really interesting example of technology and kind of local behavior coming together. You may have heard of this. It's actually been quite a big case study. Vodafone and Safaricom and Kenya and parts of East Africa developed this as a means of taking airtime, something that often quite, even the sort of lowest income people in that area or in many areas around the world will have stored on their mobile phone. Minutes that you have as an idle asset could be traded in as a kind of currency. So being able to kind of use time as money in a different way than a time bank creates a different sort of sub-economy there. It's actually worked quite well in the area. They've tried to take it into different parts of the world, but often kind of runs into different kind of cultural barriers. This is something that people in another country, another culture would actually want to use, but it's working extremely well in the market that it's actually been devised and introduced into. Bitcoin. There were a few people who held Bitcoin. I noticed hands going up this morning. I'm a shameful futurist. I've never had Bitcoin. But even as we had the kind of concept of a cryptocurrency, a sort of math-based coin like Bitcoin emerge, you immediately started kind of seeing localized spin-offs. The example here is a system called Aurora Coin which was developed by a guy named Baldur Odinson in Iceland, again, in response to the enormous amount of upheaval that was happening with Icelandic banks, the fact that many of them kind of collapsed overnight. We needed some other kind of currency system, and somebody who had knowledge of the Bitcoin system stepped forward and said, look, if you can give us access to the national genetic database of Iceland that gives us an idea of, or the ID database that gives us an idea of how many, what 350,000 people are here, we'll actually create a certain amount of coin and give it to them. We will distribute what they called an airdrop. They will actually distribute this Aurora Coin, this specific Icelandic Bitcoin, to the population. The government said, hang on a minute, we're not really sure we want that. We're not sure that it's legal. Let us go away and talk about it. They went ahead and did it anyway. The results are mixed. I think the value of an Aurora Coin is actually kind of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a Bitcoin right now. But at least they were trying to do something that was using a kind of global technology, an interesting new innovation and platform, but do it in such a way that was appropriate and specific to the local economic situation and the needs of the people there. Sometimes you win, sometimes you fail, but at least we're kind of continuing to try. There's also Spain Coin. There are a number of other kind of national and subnational crypto coins that are developed. And, we've seen the kind of upsides and the tremendous value and opportunity that could be unleashed by the sharing economy, the collaborative economy, or whichever of that long list of terms you want to use. But it's kind of maturing into a new phase now that requires, if you want to kind of scale to a global business and a global brand, you almost necessarily have to begin to extract value from the base of the marketplace, standardize as much as possible, and use that value, kind of draw it upwards in the market as a means of scaling. And what that begins to do is, Airbnb is a really interesting example. They have invested a lot of money into machine learning platform called AirSolve. They're trying to optimize the sort of rates that they can advise hosts with, and do the things that a business of that size needs to do, which is figure out exactly how much you should be charging for your home, what are the design, look, and feel that might be recommended to get a little bit more money out of it? Can we suggest the language that you use in the hosting copy? And all of that kind of standardization begins to iron out a lot of the local variation and interesting richness that's in the kinds of homes that we think about when we think about Airbnb. My friend and colleague Igor Schwartzman talks about it as airspace. It's like a hotel. You're beginning to sort of see the emergence of a common aesthetic around Airbnb properties that yield a lot of value. And that, to me, is a kind of weak signal or indicator of this kind of compression of all of that variation in local culture into more and more of a kind of common monoculture. And these are the kind of issues that happen with, a company like Uber or any of the sort of big, highly capitalized global sharing economy organizations. So we're kind of walking into a really unusual next stage of all of this, and that what other things can we find to value? What other ways can we actually judge the financial viability of a human being, the trust, loyalty, all of those sorts of things that we need to kind of be the lubricant of trade. Things like tracking your emotions. Using emotion tracking technology to find out whether you are you excited, are you nervous when you call in to get a loan from your bank. There's actually several banks looking at this right now with facial recognition technology to sort of see whether you look, not just the banker across the table from you saying, yes, son, daughter, you look fantastic, you look trustworthy, I'll give you this loan, but using technology to sort of find out what your heart rate is at that moment as you're beginning to fill out the application. Or who are you associating with? Facebook's social graph being used as a means of establishing, loan viability. And this sounds kind of unusual and very, sort of Minority Report and sci-fi, but Alibaba, one of the biggest players in the world out of China in e-commerce, has already begun to do this, because when you grow an e-commerce market so large and so fast in a place like China, people don't have credit scores. You have to start finding other proxies about their behavior to create a standardized model for a nation of several billion people to figure out how you identify them and give them credit. So this is a system called Sesame Credit that is attempting to do just that, and some of the largest banks and credit bureaus in the world are paying very, very close attention to how they can find these other kind of hidden proxies for your trustworthiness and your behavior to turn into a kind of currency to allow you to buy and sell on a network. If you're a Philip K. Dick fan, you may know that this kind of world was, kind of pre-visioned. He wrote a book called Ubik, in which a gentleman named Joe Chip, some section of the book actually has to argue with the front door of his house because it won't let him in or out unless he pays it a nickel. He has to give it 5 cents to get in or out of his home. And he decides, you know what, that's just too much, I'm going to stay in. Just a small cautionary tale. So, a couple of quick examples of what happens when you kind of take technology down to a local level. Last autumn, I had the opportunity to work with the government of Singapore and the Smart Nation effort that they've been doing to basically build a smart city out of Singapore. And for once, they went to the citizens and said, how would you like to do this? If we gave you technology, how would you like to adapt it? And there was a kind of competition that we ran in this workshop. And the winning idea was actually developing a system of kind of hyperlocal currency that allowed people to basically build value around caring for other people in the large kind of high density buildings where they lived, where often an older person, as we saw in the kind of video earlier, will go with very little attention being paid to them. They'll need things done. They need help around the house. Could someone else in the building find out that that need is there, help them, and then use that as a kind of tradable asset or value within the kind of local community of the house itself, or of the apartment itself. Another kind of quick example, in the students that I teach in Barcelona, last year we had a great group where we were asking them to kind of think about the future of money. And one group came up with this idea of a biodata co-op. We're generating all of this kind of data from our own bodies and our emotions and our activities, as I described a few minutes ago. But those right now kind of get sucked up into a system by Facebook or a bank or Microsoft or whomever is collecting that data. Why not actually kind of keep that on a local basis and use it in a community to actually trade for assets? So if some company wants to come to your town and find out or sort of scrape consumer data, why couldn't you keep that in a local co-op that's community owned and actually trade that for something like a school, a hospital, a park? It was a brilliant idea. These students didn't know anything about any of these concepts before coming in, and in about a week and a half, came up with an idea that I think could provide a really serious blueprint for creating kind of data co-ops, on a city or community basis. So I think what we see here is the kind of emergence of, or potential of, informal data economies. That these don't have to be global vertical economies where all of that kind of data and information about us and our own kind of individual value gets kind of drawn up in this huge global siphon, but can we not use those tools and the platforms that are out there to actually do things that are meaningful within this community, like a community currency or like a time bank would do? Can we not take these community platforms, generate local value systems, keep the data close to hand, and actually have our own kind of informal data economies here that are flavored by the kind of cultural needs and the human needs of this community? So just to leave you with one kind of thought, this is actually a beautiful quote by a gentleman who runs this market called Portobello in Modena, Italy, and it's a kind of time bank supermarket that was launched a couple of years ago to deal with the large levels of unemployment and the lack of money in the local community there. And in an interview that he did with, I think it was Corriere della Sera, the Italian newspaper, they were asking him why would you do this? Why would you do this in kind of in a world where we have all these amazing technologies? And his answer was, because we want to produce solidarity, not consume it. Because we want to find a way to actually bring this community closer in a time of change and create value here and keep it here. So I would kind of give you the charge to, when you go out and sort of think about how you're going to involve yourself in local or regional or national or even global kind of innovation economies. Do it on this basis. Keep this thought in mind. Do it in a way that produces solidarity and doesn't just set up a system to consume it. Thank you.